Once you have all your double hockey sticks all glued up and dry, it's important that you leave a couple of singles off to the side because you will need to use those. But also important step is, in order to get this started and to make sure that we are installing the uprights at a perpendicular 90 degrees, that's what perpendicular means, we need to cut what's called a spacer. And this is something that's used in construction all the time to make it easy for repeated things to happen. So for instance, we're going to be installing the exact same pieces up and down. So we need to have a spacer to start. And why we leave one off to the side is we need to measure that. So I utilized the lines. I actually took one piece, and I knew that I would be close if I just cut it off the end. So I cut the end off of one hockey stick, and what I did was I utilized the lines, or a very simple ruler. I could take a ruler, I can hold it up at 90 degrees, make a pencil mark, and then cut a piece to that pencil mark. Or if you have a mat, what I used is I used the lines as well as the marks on the side to make sure that I measured and cut a piece so that when I did cut that, I know that the line on the bottom here and the line on the bottom, it's super hard to stand up, these two lines would be parallel with each other. So for instance, if I were to take a piece like this and put that onto the bottom, I would have nice parallel lines. So essentially what you're doing is you're cutting a spacer to ensure that the distance from here to here is the exact same. So that spacer could be placed anywhere here to ensure that I would have two parallel lines. And as you can see from the measuring, whatever strategy you use, there's plenty of different strategies. That's what you need. Okay, once you have your spacer, we're going to do a dry run. So in order to do that, you're going to start with one of your double hockey sticks, and we are going to place that in to our frame. We're going to take our spacer, and we're going to put our spacer across the top. Now, kind of learning from mistakes, what I did is, as you can see here, there's a bit of a dip at the bend, so I didn't put my spacer right up in the top, because what I noticed is that when I did this, the space here and the space here was actually smaller. So I moved it about a half an inch down, and that creates that rigid space. The other thing I'd recommend is one thing that you could do to help make sure that everything is perfect is cut a bunch of spacers the exact size. And we might do that in the next step, but it'll depend how our dry fit goes. So what I mean by a dry fit is we're not affixing anything, we're not gluing anything. So you're taking your double hockey stick and then you're just alternating. So making sure that everything is nice and flush. Flush meaning touching each other here. So you can see that I have a nice touching of the uprights and the leg from the other one, and the uprights and the leg here. So that's touching. And then you're just going to continue that pattern. And if all your cuts are done really well and accurate in terms of measuring and making sure, yeah, you'll notice that it wants to bow out a little bit, so we'll have to do that. You continue the alternating pattern, making sure everything's touching. What's crazy is how strong this will be once we're done. So now here's why I told you to ensure that you leave some singles. Because right now, if I were going to put this in, my single or my double would not fit. So we leave our single, we have that here, making sure it touches and it touches, and then we don't really have to worry about that void. So what I can tell just by doing this quickly, if I pinch the top wall and the bottom wall, I'm going to pinch that roughly at about halfway, and then I'm just going to push the bottom and I'm going to push the top. What I notice is I have a real nice even space here. If for some reason this space was not even, that means either your tops aren't touching or your cuts are a little bit off. And what I would recommend is cutting a whole bunch of spacers to do that, to space in between each one. Okay? Now that we have a dry fit that we're satisfied with, it's time for gluing. Okay, time for gluing. Pretty easy process here. We just want to make sure that we're doing this in the neatest way possible, and it really doesn't take a lot of glue. So I want you to think about going a little bit less is more in this instance. So thinking about where this is going to attach, we're just going to put a little bit of glue across the bottom. I'm going to put a kind of a big blob here and just come out. But what I want you to notice is I'm not really going near the ends with my glue. And that's because I don't want that to squeeze out. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to place that so that it's touching the end. I'm going to insert that in, and I'm going to provide a little bit of pressure down, making sure that that sits. And part of the reason why I put a bunch in the middle is that's where there's a little bit of a gap. So we just want that to affix. We don't really care about this because we haven't used any of the spacers yet. So we're just going to make sure that that attaches, make sure that dries. One thing you'll notice is as I glue, obviously gravity is going to come into play, and I am going to be able to clean this up after as it hardens. It doesn't take very long. I don't want to ruin my mat, so just make sure that you clean that up. But what I do want to encourage is that you're doing this over a surface that can get glue on it and something that you don't really necessarily care about. Okay, now here's the key part, is once you get the first one in, that's where you want to go back to your spacer. You're going to insert that again. I did mine at about, like I said, about an inch, half inch down from the top. Okay, you're going to get your next piece. Same process, so glue, and I'm going to put a little bit of extra in there in the middle. And we're going to insert down and up, and we're going to make sure that we're putting pressure so that this guy is pushing against the spacer and this one is pushing, touching here at equal points. And then what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze the top down, making sure that that glue is holding. What you don't want is to have any spaces. You want that spacer to be nice and tight, your second hockey stick to be nice and tight, pushing up against, and then down at the bottom, you're going to have a little bit of play. So the important connection is once you have this first one set in place, is this second one is pushing nice and tight, not pushing, but sitting nice and flush across the top here. You want that to hold, and then you're simply going to glue, repeat, making sure again that the hockey stick is sitting snug against the next piece. Okay, once you finish that entire process, one little tip and trick, don't worry about the glue sticking this down, and don't worry about the fact that they aren't glued at the opposite end of the hockey stick. So if I glued down here, I'm not putting any glue at the top. That's okay. If you do this perfect, you actually don't need any glue there whatsoever. The last tip is so I started over here, and this was my spacer. You can take your spacer and put it into each section, and it should fit perfect without bending any of the cardboard at all. So when you go to put it in, it should be a little bit of a snug fit. So if you put it in sideways and then just turn, it should hold snug without collapsing any of the flutes. So that should be a pretty snug fit all the way across. That's an easy way to test to see if you've made a bunch of parallel lines. Again, parallel lines, two lines that are equidistant away, which means they will never touch. The last trick is with the last piece, which was a single hockey stick. I did put glue on the blade end, so where the fold is, but then just also at the tip. So again, here's the hockey stick. Again, pretend this is a single one. I put glue here, but then I did put a little bead and I just held it so that it affixed to the side of this hockey stick. Okay, when you go to lift this up, the one thing that you want to make sure is that there's no rock. So this is sitting completely flat, meaning it's not rocking like this or like this. You want it to be completely flat because that means we are making a nice plumb wall. But one thing I do is with my X-Acto knife or box cutter, I just start to pry up and I just push down and just kind of score all the glue. It doesn't have to all come off because when you peel it up, there are cavities for you to kind of push that glue in or just scrape it off. Now what you should notice is when you put this up, this should be able to stand, again, assuming there's no glue or anything on the bottom, should be able to stand perfectly tall, and if you look over top, if you're looking straight down, you should not be able to see the bottom or any of the protrusions if they're coming out. If they are, just make sure that you put them in, and obviously they're movable. We don't have to glue anything here because once we put our actual wall on, this is just the framing, so once we put our kind of drywall, if you think of it that way, once we put our drywall on in a single piece, this is going to be super rigid and super strong.